former Secretary of State, Fox News contributor Mike Pompeo. Let's jump around the globe. Let's start with the Russia-Ukrainian border. We know what happened with Crimea. We know what happened in eastern Ukraine. I can't think of any other reason that Vladimir Putin would put a lot of troops there, except for their territorial ambitions, Mr. Secretary. And I don't think Tony Blinken saying they're going to have a high-impact economic tactics used against them is too intimidating to Vladimir.
Sean, I think that's right. It's good to be with you tonight. Those words aren't going to make a hill of beans difference to Vladimir Putin's decision-making. They won't engender the deterrence that we need. I mean, look at the facts. Vladimir Putin shuts down a pipeline. The Russians shut down a pipeline in the southeastern United States, closing off gasoline. President Biden goes to meet with him at a summit and just warns him and says, don't do it again. They watched the debacle in Afghanistan, the weakness that we showed there. You mentioned the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. We should be clear, too. What we've done with American energy has increased the wealth for Vladimir Putin. When oil prices are high, Vladimir Putin is a big winner. I think he believes that he can make the decisions he needs to make. He has always believed that the dissolution of the Soviet Union was the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century. He wants those satellite states back for his country, and now he sees that we have a president who's not prepared to do the hard work of deterrence. I think that engenders real risk. The risk of conflict increases the weaker the United States is. We have shown no resolve in these first 10 months of this administration.
All right, we're watching China. We're watching President Xi. They watched Joe Biden abandon Americans in Afghanistan 13 days after he said he wouldn't do that. There's still hundreds of them there, thousands of people with American green cards that are welcome to this country. So China talks about reunification. We both know it's really a takeover of Taiwan. They're flying over Taiwan airspace every day with their fighter jets. And then, you know, I've got to look at this. Why would Joe Biden not lift a finger on Russia and a finger on China? Now, we know that Hunter Biden made money from both countries. He got $3.5 million from a Russian oligarch, the First Lady of Moscow. He had the $1.5 billion deal with the Bank of China, $100,000 shopping spree with the Chinese national, and then Miranda Devine's book. Off of Hunter's laptop, Joe himself sat in on meetings directly related to deals with China energy companies. So I would argue that if Libya has a dossier on Hunter Biden and the Biden family, I got to imagine the dossier that China and Russia have is probably a lot more detailed and that this family is compromised. Is that a logical conclusion? You were once a CIA director.
Sean, I have no doubt that the Chinese and Russians know a heck of a lot more than the Libyans do about nearly everything that happens in the world. I think that's certainly true. We saw Miranda Devine's work. We saw what was happening with China. But I frankly think the problems go deeper than this. You know this, Sean. The whole world watches everything that we do. When we strike at Qasem Soleimani, not only do the Iranians notice, but the Chinese, the North Koreans, and the Russians. Just the converse is true as well. When we're weak, when we demonstrate we're not prepared to bring Americans home from Afghanistan, those leaders know that they can roll the United States. This is something that Xi Jinping, the leader in China, certainly must be observing. He must know that he has a window to do the things that he wants to do, including trying to bring Taiwan back into his orbit. These are perilous moments. This is a high-risk time for the United States of America, and it can only be fixed by a president who's prepared to defend the things that matter most to the American people and defend our interests around the world and keep us secure. To date, President Biden has shown very little intent of actually delivering on the things he promised the Americans he would do.
So if the Libyans' dossier on Hunter had in it that he was a drug addict who frequented prostitutes, you would assume, as I do, that the Russians and the Chinese knew as much, but they also did deals with millions, and in the case of the Bank of China, $1.5 billion. Why would somebody with no experience, I would think that the communist Chinese would be smart enough to know about Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, you know, really, let's say, professionals in the field. Why would they go with somebody with no experience that we can find?
You know, Sean, I'm pretty creative, but I can't think of a single reason that would be the case. Look, we saw this, too, with the dealings in Ukraine. We saw that he sat on the board of Burisma. as an advisor to Burisma with no known experience there. There's something going on there different, fundamentally different, than looking for someone who can help your business create wealth through normal business practices. There's a real taint there, and I can assure you, if something like this happened in the previous administration, the media would be all over it. They'd be making all kinds of accusations. We now know that the media got sucked into the Russia hoax narrative with the Steele dossier, right? They continued to report things that they had to know the sources were making up or lying about, and yet they furthered that story. They don't want to touch the Hunter Biden story. It's an important component of what happened prior to President Biden taking office, and I think the American people need to think about what that means for American national security.
I didn't come in tops of my class at West Point like you did, and I was never the CIA director, but every instinct in my body tells me that the Biden family is compromised by all of these countries, and that is a threat to our national security, and that does need to be investigated, unlike the Russia hoax. But, Mr. Secretary, always love having you on. Thank you, sir.